Hello horror hounds, welcome back to our look through film by film the work of David Cronenberg. We're going to skip his third feature, which was a straightforward drama about drag racing, just like when we did this for Dario Argento back in the day. We skipped his fourth film, which was a non-horror historical comedy, and we will move straight on to The Brood, a film from 1979, and at the time Roger Ebert asked, are there really people who want to see reprehensible trash like this? Concluding with, I guess so, it's in its second week. Yes, Roger. 4 decades on, the answer is still a resounding yes. The Brood follows the man in the process of a divorce, challenging the custody arrangements for their daughter. This is complicated by the fact that the mother, Nola, is currently institutionalized and under the care of a controversial psychotherapist and his cutting-edge, cultish therapy techniques. Plus, there's a series of murders, and the victims all seem to be in the familial orbit of this broken nuclear family unit. Once again, Cronenberg's made a quantum leap in technical ability and confidence, and it's clear for all to see. Illustrated best, perhaps, with a conversation scene between the husband, father, Frank, and his lawyer towards the start of the film. In Shivers and Rabid, this scene would be static and perfunctory. Here it's dynamic, there's camera movement, various camera setups, active editing that gives the scene some actual energy. The opening of The Brood, too, displays an assuredness that has grown since those previous two films. Shivers opened with a bang, with a murder and a DIY autopsy. Rabid literally opened with a bang, with a motorcycle accident. But The Brood opens with a sequence that's reserved and quietly creepy. We see Dr. Raglan, Oliver Reed, performing a demonstration of his pioneering technique in which he takes a patient through a therapy session in front of an audience at his institute. But at first, we as an audience are asked to do some work, not being told explicitly and straight away what it is we're being presented with. Is this an exchange between father and son? Is it a piece of theatre? Is it an exercise in an acting class or some form of presentation? Cronenberg is confident enough to hold back pieces of information. He feeds us breadcrumbs in his own time. A lot of the exposition here is folded into the rest of the script, much more surreptitiously, much more streamlined. The therapy sessions are a great vehicle to teach us about Raglan's techniques, whilst at the same time revealing vital information about his patients. It's in this way that we learn that Nola herself was neglected and traumatized as a child due to her alcoholic mother and emotionally and then physically absent father. Raglan's technique is called psychoplasmics, and in The Brood it is our gateway to exploring two of Cronenberg's thematic obsessions, science gone awry and absentee fathers. Clearly Cronenberg loves a mad scientist or an irresponsible scientist, and whether their intentions are good or ill, Cronenberg clearly wields a healthy mistrust of people in positions of power and authority who assume our compliance. Psychoplasmics is a therapy which allows patients to turn inner psychological trauma into physical growths which the body can then purge itself of. Of course, it all goes wrong. Nola becomes the poster child of psychoplasmics, but takes the idea of giving emotional trauma physical form to its natural conclusion in a David Cronenberg movie. Cronenberg is also zeroing in on his fascination with the notion of absentee fathers or absentee creator figures, surely prefigured in literature's preeminent absentee father creator, Victor Frankenstein, or God, depending on your theological bent. The scientist father creator in Shivers absented himself right at the start of the movie by slitting his own throat. Dr. Kaloid in Rabid seemed more caring and professional, to be fair, but he was eventually taken out by the ramifications of his own pioneering medical science, robbing him the opportunity to make amends for his hubris. In The Brood, we have three father figures: an actual biological father, Frank, who's in the throes of the custody battle for his daughter, We have an absentee biological father from the previous generation, Nola's father, now facing the ramifications of the mistakes that he made when his daughter was a child, those sins now being visited on the next generation in the form of his granddaughter. And finally, Dr. Raglan himself, who in his role as radical psychotherapist literally takes the places of patients' fathers during various therapy sessions. A cuckoo in the family nest indeed. With a budget of $1.5 million, Cronenberg was able to afford names and cast Oliver Reed and Samantha Eggar as his stars. The results are there for all to see. I don't need to eulogize about what a fantastic job Eggar does in selling the central conceit. She commits. She makes the dialogue sing, and she makes the utterly preposterous real. Likewise, Oliver Reed, the man is simply a force of nature, magnetic, charismatic. The therapy scenes between these two actors are like acting masterclasses. Both clearly understand the text and the subtext and mine both for every possible nuance and piece of meaning. There are other standout performances by those playing some of Raglan's other abandoned patients, and they all help to bolster what is becoming a mainstay of Cronenberg's early work, the charisma-free leading man. Poor old Art Hindle as Frank Carveth, he doesn't pop, he doesn't sing like all the other actors around him, at least in 2018 and beyond. We can amuse ourselves with the uncanny resemblance between Art Hindle in The Brood and Alden Ehrenreich in Solo, A Star Wars Story. Before then, we just had to hunker down and endure a wooden performance. We also get to welcome Howard Shore to the family in his film score debut, who would go on to become a long-term collaborator with Cronenberg. And this is not just the first time that Cronenberg works with Shore to score one of his films. It's also the first time, and it's perhaps because of the beauty of the score that Howard Shore presents him with, it's the first time that Cronenberg utilizes standalone opening credit sequences. Just the text with Shore's music playing over the top of it, which in later projects he says is a technique he employs to try and transition the audience from, you know, the outside real world they've come from into the cinema, and just transition them into a frame of mind where they're ready and prepared to receive the film. The Brood is clearly a personal film for Cronenberg. It's brutal. It's about not the breakdown of society, not the breakdown of inhibitions or bodies. It's about the personal breakdown of a family. And The Brood was the product of a familial breakdown. At the time of its inception, David Cronenberg was in the middle of his own divorce settlement with his wife and custody battle for his daughter. I'd suggest maybe Cronenberg made The Brood while he's still amongst the fracture and fallout of the breakdown of his family. Didn't have the kind of distance from it which might have afforded the story an element of detached intellectual curiosity that marks out a lot of his other films. I think it's probably stronger for that. He had been working on a script called The Sensitives, which would later become his next feature, Scanners, but Cronenberg admitted that The Brood was a film that needed to be made next. It insisted on being made. So perhaps it's not too much of a stretch to suggest that the filmmaking process on The Brood was his own personal version of Psychoplasmics, taking something deeply personal and internal and transforming it into something physical and external. The Brood really is his rage on screen. It's also arguably his first truly great film. It anticipates the more nuanced explorations of demons of the mind that he will refine to the point of practical purity in Dead Ringers. The climactic vision of Samantha Eggar's transformed body refines his earlier explorations of body horror, whilst pointing the way towards later explorations of the theme in Videodrome, The Fly, Naked Lunch, Existence. It's a powerful meditation on how psychological problems can manifest in the real world, and how cycles of trauma and hurt can infect and play out again in ever decreasing circles passed on from one generation to the next. As powerful as it was 40 years ago, I'd argue it's possibly even more so now, with our wider acceptance in the early 21st century of the notion of cycles of abuse and trauma, and our understanding that the victim can, in tragic circumstances, go on to become the aggressor. The only sane riposte, to my mind, to the brood is to just end by reading you Philip Larkin's famous poem, This Be the Verse. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself.